Baby Don't Shoot, a gay love story inspired by Luigi Mangione. Written by Sally Strait, narrated by Gray Trainer. Copyright 2025. To support this podcast, give it 5 stars and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Listener discretion is advised. Chapter 9. 4 weeks later. After pressing the elevator button, going down, Ted loosened his tie. It was his Friday, still Thursday for nearly everyone else in the building. Floors and floors, a mishmash of companies, folks trying to accomplish everything or nothing at all until 5 p.m. said they could scurry away. But Ted had already finished his last meeting for the day before everyone else's final bell, with no presentations or tutorials or any bugs that needed correcting. He was on top of his shit. The elevator doors parted, and so did the glossy sheen of Ted's warped image, smiling, giving way to a wood-paneled interior stuffed with men and women in business attire, mouths closed, eyes sagging. Ted felt bad for these people. He had been like them, too. Maybe you should all get fucked. Literally, he thought, and the temptation to shout this was quite strong as he joined the throng, punching the lobby button with a confident fist. He even had to stop himself from turning to the squat man at his side, whose neck veins were bulging at heart attack level, straining the skin, and ask him how his day was going. Instead, Ted simply sighed a content sigh, shoulders falling, eyelids relaxing. He could feel everyone else in the elevator suddenly hate him, for Ted was the only one going to the lobby. Floor after floor after floor, gray suits came on and burgundy blouses stepped off, but he could have ridden from floor 150 all the way down to the basement, stopping at every single one, and he wouldn't have cared. Ted had a 4-day work week now, thanks to his increased productivity and working out a proper schedule with his secretary Shayla. And all this good change stemmed from the fact that he blew and got blown by a guy who made his previous jerk-off fantasy, Chris Evans, look like a tired, run-of-the-mill, weathered pig. Since then, Ted had stopped drinking during the day, choosing to make red wine a weekend treat, 1 glass per sitting. There was also the incorporation of even more vegetables into his daily diet, found in blended morning smoothies, steamed for lunch and dinner, and he'd also begun stretching twice a week, which he still hated, groaning throughout, but 2 days was more than avoiding it completely for the last 56 years. Ted was getting closer to touching his toes. With a silent smile, Ted had himself to thank, but it was time with Mario that jump-started everything. Before the young man, he never knew he could have such chemistry with someone before, never knew he could be desired, attended to. Post-Mario, there was possibility, an open door, where there once had been a brick wall, so fortified that not even a slinky bug could find its way through. "What's different about you?" Shayla had asked him, her chin nearly touching her shoulder as she appraised this new Ted. Vitamins," he replied. "Oh, yeah." She jabbed a finger into the air, having received an answer that made sense. "That'll do it." Of course, Ted wanted to brag about Mario. There was the temptation to make a social media account and do one of those story time things that counted as news for the modern day, screaming about how awesome it was to get fucked by something so beautiful, and in turn feeling so beautiful yourself. Ted did think about texting Mario back after getting home from the gauntlet, and every day since. He was still thinking about it while walking through the hall of elevators on his way out of the building. But what was the point? The young man couldn't give less of a shit about Ted, and that was okay. He didn't need more. Didn't need to be Icarus flying up around Mario's sculpted abs, the young man's splash of chest hair tickling his nose, making his way into that forest of dark, soft curls, all so he could get higher. Next to that dumpster, Ted got more than he could have ever dreamed of, and that was enough. Plus, to Ted, if Mario had wanted him that badly, another round of wet friction, Mario would have sent another text. But he didn't, and again, that was fine. Ted had the experience, and Mario's text messages as proof that something so shiny did once land in his lap. And one day, on his deathbed, Ted would be able to gather the nurses, his attending doctor, and a crew of hungry residents, and relay how he got the best blowjob literally known to man from the most gorgeous human that ever lived. "Those lips," Ted would say before croaking, his brain swimming in a sea of oxytocin, thanks to a young man who was glad Ted found his collapsible chair. And that was it. Finally out of the elevator, Ted needed to allow some of this internal joy to burst forward. "You have a good day," he said, brimming with cheer, to the security guard at the lobby desk next to the turnstiles where people exited or scanned their badges to enter. "Yeah, all right," the guard said, barely lifting a hand in response, maintaining his gaze on the ceremony of beeps and admitting green lights. "He gets it," Ted thought with a smirk. As soon as he opened the glass door to the outside, a rush of wind slid across his front, racing up toward the other surrounding skyscrapers, either gray or black, some windows catching a gleam from the sun that had begun its descent. "After you, after you, after you." Ted was holding the door open for the workforce returning from a late lunch or going back for forgotten belongings. "After you, after you, The wind blew the tip of Ted's tie straight into his mouth, and blowing a raspberry, reaching for his lips, he let go of the door, allowing it to smack into a tall, red-headed man with a heavy, freckled neck. "Prick," the man said as he rubbed his hip and continued in. "Sorry, have a good one," Ted called to a closed door, straightening his tie. More business people climbed the outside faint cherry staircase as Ted lazily descended it, gazing around for the answer on how he should fill the rest of his day. A Chinese restaurant caught his eye, but then Ted turned away, not in the mood to simply eat to pass the time. There was a billboard for the aquarium, a sea turtle giving its arm a wave that a graffiti artist stuck a lit joint in, adding also a bong, which Ted guessed was to relay that ocean life got stoned in a variety of ways. But wandering around, looking at fish with screaming children, sounded loud and meandering. However, a trip across town to the Museum of Modern Art might tickle his fancy. Ted went to sit down on one of the steps despite the heavy foot traffic. He then gazed around, registering a clacking sound he'd been hearing since stepping out into the open world. "Excuse me," a voice said. Ted abandoned his hunt to locate the smacking sound, to see an annoyed woman in flowing white pants, clearly maneuvering around him. But to Ted, she found her way easily. "You're all good. Have a great day," Ted said. "Prick," she muttered. Ignoring her, Ted turned back to the cement valley before him. Clack. There it was again, followed by a scraping noise. And that's when Ted spotted them, skateboarders, jumping and grinding and trying their flips over an empty public bike rack and a bench that one brave pigeon remained perched on. Ted found it hard not to admire the gumption of these skaters, throwing their full weight into these tricks that, more often than not, they weren't landing. There were 3 of them, one fully blonde, the other dirty, and one with a full head of black curls. Then the truth of what he was looking at hit him, and the impulse to stand struck him. Glancing at these skateboarders, Ted had assumed they were preteens, but then their muscle tone and stature became clearer. These were men, young men, and one of them was Mario. Ted felt like he couldn't breathe, like suddenly his lungs had been deprived of air for an impossible 5 minutes. He turned to go up the stairs, then stopped. "Excuse me," a voice said. "Yeah, I know. I'm a prick," Ted said to the voice. A heavy silence fell, and Ted glanced behind him to see a surprised pregnant woman holding both her stomach and the hand of a little boy. "Is my daddy in heaven?" The boy's question was as much for Ted as it was for the woman. Glad for an opportunity to move further away from Mario, however incremental, Ted leaped up the stairs until he reached the door, holding it open. "I'm so sorry. Please, have a good day." With a soft scowl, the pregnant woman took her time traversing the stairs while glaring at Ted. "Is that man a prick, Mommy?" She made it a point to stop before the door and look down at her son. "We don't use that word, Jefferson." Then she looked square at Ted. "It's for lowlifes." "Got it. Have a good day," Ted said to the marbled ground. Making a tiny O with his lips, Ted exhaled, hoping for another breeze to cool him down. He was not the same man who literally strutted out of the building. Hands shaking, gaze erratic, he'd suddenly become a mess. The snapping and rolling of the skateboards, about 100 feet away, blared in his ears as if they were rolling on top of him. When the next person walked into the building, Ted followed, though he kept peeking back at the plaza outside. He could try and flee, or he could hide. But that was Mario out there, really Mario, that walking beam of light. His dress shoes clomping across the lobby floor, Ted began to pace before returning to the glass doors, standing in front of a "Use Other Door" sign written in English, Cantonese, and Spanish. He peered out and watched Mario move. The young man was wearing a loose pair of dark blue jeans, faded at the knee, and a heather gray t-shirt. Mario was unbothered, yet serious, fixated on this thing he clearly liked to do. Really, Ted thought, Mario should be selling skateboards, or the clothes on his back, or the cigarettes anyone would want after getting a gander at a guy like him. Seeing him again, Ted didn't feel sturdy and bushy-tailed. He felt ravenous and deprived, Like in that moment, given any picture of Mario, he'd shove it in his mouth, swallowing it with a greedy abandon. Anything for one more taste. Perceived, direct, fucking metaphysical, why not? But how could he go outside and simply maneuver around Mario and his friends as they were skateboarding, right next to the escalators that led down into the car park? I'll flag a taxi off to the side, Ted thought. I'll take the bus 2 streets over. I'd walk in the complete opposite direction with vulnerable bare feet, anything just to avoid him, because Ted simply did not trust himself not to gawk wordlessly right in front of the young man. And then the image of Mario clouded as Ted's heavy yet rapid breathing fogged the view through the glass door. He winced and straightened the tie he had nearly choked on. What was he doing? Worrying about approaching this guy? Worrying about Mario approaching him? What a laugh. A bona fide chuckle. The young man didn't care an iota, a grain of sand in the Sahara about Ted. It had been weeks, and there had been no second text and certainly no call. Sure, Ted could have gone back to the beach at the same time, same day he'd seen Mario, but he didn't. Why? Because it was over. Ted had taken the money, and he had run. Ted wiped at the fogged glass with a hurried hand and exited through a working door. He could and would return to the happiness he so securely held riding down that elevator, and would be just fine without letting this non-run-in ruin his day. They were 2 strangers before, they'd come together, and now they were strangers again. With Mario skateboarding and Ted off to probably make a salad, now too wired to go to a museum, and then later masturbate to the memory of the gauntlet, his morning and nighttime ritual since the encounter. Walking down the plaza stairs, Ted planned to make a question mark of a walk, starting straight until a curve around the site of the skateboarding, giving a wide berth, to then arrive at the escalator that would take him to his car and the rest of his day free of any young men. And in doing so, Ted looked like someone trying to hide. His head down, his walk hurried. Also, he nearly kept glancing up, still itching to catch one more glimpse. He made it down the stairs and across the plaza, but the minute he started to curve left, an awkward lean, giving him the appearance of an electric race car struggling to stay on an invisible track, Ted could sense eyes on him. "Hey!" a voice called. Ted jumped, but pressed on. "Hey, you!" He'd been caught. Ted stopped and looked up. Then his brow furrowed in confusion. It was a canvasser. "Do you have time for Jesus' crusade today?" Ted could see Mario right behind this interloper, who was probably a teenager, wearing a blue vest with a giant white crucifix patched on the front, holding a clipboard that had a QR code for donations, one for suckers who stopped, like Ted, and scanned just to shut the kid up. Organizations always picked the wide-eyed and apple-cheeked of the congregation to exploit the pockets of sinners, Ted thought, returning his gaze to the ground. "I really have to go," Ted said. He began walking away, too tempted to glance at those curls again, as a motionless Mario was primed for hungry eyes. He was waiting for his turn to skateboard over the bench. Ted was unfamiliar with the right terminology. "But Jesus needs you for his fight." The young canvasser with the blunt bowl cut reached out to grab Ted, who clumsily shuffled away at the sight of clawing hands. "Oh, fuck," Ted muttered, falling forward until he gained his footing and decided to just book it for the escalator. "Ted?" a familiar voice called. Already in a run, Ted made it to the escalator's rubber railing, a slippery, busy thing, before he stopped. Because of course Ted stopped. The sound of that voice was much harder to turn away from than the phrases, "Hey, look at those tits!" or "Did you just drop a $100 bill?" But there had been no price involving Mario. What they experienced together had been freely given by both parties, made on a sunny afternoon. That's what had made it so special. If Mario had called after him, which surprisingly he did, why should Ted run away? How much longer could Ted be shocked by this young man wanting to connect with him? Wasn't it time to just give in? Fully? Ted turned on his heel and started to laugh, even though nothing was funny, just humiliating. And there was Mario, walking toward him, skateboard in hand, the bottom of which was littered with stickers of logos and brands that were complete gibberish to Ted, except for one that was of Madonna fully nude on the side of the road. That picture was in the singer's sex book, something Ted had purchased as a 20-year-old, essentially Mario's age, in an attempt to prove to himself he was straight. A colossal failure, as he only masturbated to completion when focused on the glossy pages of a shirtless Vanilla Ice and the book's many nude male models. But the young man coming toward him probably had no idea who that woman on a skateboard was. Probably just some naked chick to him. "Do you have time for Jesus?" The canvasser had chosen Mario as his next target, but, shooting up a flat hand, Ted's once lover was no sucker. I only have time for cock, man. Ted looked around, surprised by Mario's brazenness, but that was another difference between them. At 20, Ted was jerking off to glossy coffee table books of boobs and spread vaginas, curtains parted, saying hello. And here was this young virile man in 2025, bragging to a stranger about his love of dick. Ted had to admit these were different times. "Hey, Ted," Mario beamed. Instead of sticking out a hand or going big for the hug, Ted remained still until the young man made the first move. And Mario came with the hug. An all-encompassing, arms-wrapped kind of hug, without any fraternal backslaps. There were even a few seconds of lingering, 3 full Mississippis, Ted counted. "Hey, Mario," Ted said, attempting to match the young man's cool, confident greeting. The thought occurred to him to add a pause between the words, in order to keep things completely casual, almost distant, tone implying Ted hadn't thought about this young man for every single minute since they parted. But Mario was keeping it friendly, so why shouldn't he? "Yo, it's cool to bump into you." Mario leaned in and began speaking out of the side of his mouth. "Never heard from ya." Ted winced, his whole body turning red, both embarrassed and charmed. Mario giggled, then continued. "Sorry, I'm not trying to razz you, man. Nothing like that, it's just..." Mario raised his shoulders to his ears and giggled again. "I had fun." The information flying at Ted was debilitating. He had to accept this was happening, and yet, how could he? But what really had him perplexed is that Mario also seemed to be nervous. A god with a mortal wound, a pig flying in sunglasses. It seemed impossible things could happen and happen again. Ted assumed the words would come. Mario smiled, his eyes nearly closed from doing it so wide, and another giggle came out of him, this one seemingly more comfortable. Ted held up a hand to help usher anything from his mouth. "How are you?" But then Mario's eyes fell, and his face darkened for a second, clouded with distress. After a beat, he regained composure and spoke in that faraway voice that Ted only remembered once he heard it. "It's been whatever, you know? It's not important." He exhaled, a deep one, the last remaining shadowiness disappearing from his demeanor, and looked Ted up and down, his sunniness coming out again, full smile, bright eyes. "How are you? You look good, my man." Mario swung out an arm and gripped Ted's shoulder, giving it a squeeze. Ted's feet leapt in their shoes, as did his cock and his pants. If only Ted had a briefcase or a shoulder bag to hide what was quickly arriving. Clearly pleased, Ted's eyes were wide and his smile bright, looking like the Cheshire Cat, but charmingly so. A smitten goon, rather than a smug trickster. "You look great too, but..." Ted couldn't look at Mario while he said this. "Of course you know that you look good." Mario leaned his neck forward in disbelief, then looked down at himself, picking at his clothes. "Really, I feel like a dog's ass." He looked up with that smile and Ted nearly stumbled back. "But you look great." With a few steps forward, Mario was right in Ted's face. The street sounds fell away. The clacking of the skateboards quieted. Intimacy could do that. Connection could hush a thunderstorm. At least, theirs could. "I really dig your tie," Mario said, staring at Ted's lips. Then, squeezing the trigger, the young man looked him straight in the eye, those blazing browns, and Ted made a promise he'd never come to work without a briefcase ever again. Chapter 10. This hadn't been Mario's plan. The intended move for the day had been one of reconnaissance. Scout the location, under the guise of a casual skate, clock any familiar faces, really just get a taste of the space where someday soon, something might happen. Perhaps something ugly, but not yet. Mario promised himself that if he was shaping up to do a stupid thing, he'd at least be smart about it, really sketch a scenario. And there, with his clueless skateboard buddies out on the business plaza, he was only just beginning to get an idea of what, to him, he had no choice but to do. The letter, that shitty correspondence of, "Sorry, better life next time," regarding the future of his mom's surgery, the one that was supposed to get her out of pain, the procedure that might save her. That letter told Mario that he'd somehow have to get nasty to get things done. Only what that nasty thing was to successfully get what he wanted was still at bay. A charm dangling off the rearview mirror, the sparkle of any child's eye, who's not allowed to touch it, even when they feel like they should. And one day, they might just have to, and unbuckle themselves, cross the center console, and grab it, no matter who's driving or how unsafe it made things for anybody else. The surgery being denied changed everything about his mother's sickness. It lit a fiery anger inside of him, where once despair and heartache had resided in a helpless heap. Reading the words, "We're sorry to inform you," spun Mario's insides into a gnashing whirl, an energizing thing. Hate the fuel, all in the name of a son's unconditional love for his dear mother. Mario couldn't stifle this raging animosity, though he tried so hard to mask it from his mother. But the fun-loving guy, who drew anime characters on his lab reports and always made it a point to chat up even the shy kids in his class, he was gone. "Yo, what's with you, man?" Blake had asked him after Mario practically booked it from their shared elective, Psych 102, Abnormalities of the Mind. But constant movement, keeping up with his countless responsibilities, school, work, live-in nurse, was the only thing that helped Mario feel normal or useful or human, providing him with this sharp kinetic energy. "Nothing," Mario would say to anyone who asked, and many did, seeing the golden boy withdraw and isolate, choosing to spend his time either gigging for money or hovering over his mom, rather than vie for any sliver of youthful living. No dates, no parties in dorm rooms, no careless time at the beach, no chit-chat. For Mario, the imperfect shield of a son, there was only sacrifice and hard work. Anything else could get fucked. But of course this wasn't what Mario wanted. In a just world with a benevolent healthcare system, his mom would have gotten the remaining cancer cut out of her, the mass that medicine couldn't completely destroy. But this was the real world, colder than the steel of dental instruments. And this was a thing that hadn't gone their way, something he couldn't even begin to control. A fact proven to him by his endless follow-up emails and phone calls to HealthShare United, even letters about the letter. All of it went unanswered, ignored. HealthShare United didn't care about Mario's mother and her fading health. They didn't care that Mario had to help her shower, frail from the cancer-killing medicine that also ate away at her bone density. They didn't care about her mouth sores, also from the medication, that stung her constantly and made eating practically unbearable unless she took pain meds an hour before meals. Pills for pills for pills. They didn't care that his mother would reach back to squeeze his knee while Mario brushed her hair, a touch so simple but so loaded that said both, "I love you," and "Our goodbye is coming." To the insurance company, a system of cruelty orchestrated by a specific group of men in a high-gleaming tower, one Mario wished he could founder, the windows snapping in two, each floor falling and smacking together, becoming a heap of rubble, which is exactly how they treated his mother, as something to let detonate. Because, to them, she was nothing. His everything was expendable, like misshapen produce. All of this boiled an electrifying hate inside Mario, had him fantasizing about dark things, but even he, as incensed as he'd become, had limits for what he might do. There would certainly be no grand annihilation, for what would that get him? Plus, that would involve the destruction of innocence, and Mario would never do that. He simply wanted to hold the responsible accountable. Make the suits nervous in a way that would get his mother what she needed. But the how was still the question, one he hoped he'd answer with a surveying of the building home to United HealthShare. And in doing so, he hadn't expected to spot a man who looked familiar, a lot like that Ted guy, practically skipping out of the skyscraping confines Mario would kill to get access to. And when the man who looked like Ted appeared to be avoiding him, specifically him, the older man's gait a plotting thing with his face turned away from Mario, it was clear that this was indeed Ted, and he was definitely trying to avoid Mario. Mario's anger yearned to bite down on this aspect, hungry for more fuel, no matter the kind. But instead, as Mario stood there, waiting to attempt an ollie that his heart wasn't in, the thick, crumpling rust inside him stilled a little, allowing good feelings to pour over the gnarled murkiness. With this appearance of Ted came the long-forgotten lightheartedness, amusement, and Mario chuckled. Outside of easier moments with his mom, in the name of desperately trying to keep their interactions light and positive, the last time he had laughed had been in the gauntlet. Smirking at Ted continued to navigate around him, so conspicuously trying to be inconspicuous. Mario laughed even harder, reminded of the literal joy he felt during their time together. He also got a kick out of seeing Ted in his suit and his tangerine tie. Despite his intended mission, despite his pain, Mario could admit to himself that he wanted to take that tie off with his teeth, feel it across his tongue, while Ted took him from behind, pumping even more good feelings into his rage-riddled body that neither meditation nor intense workouts refused to quell. As Ted continued his scurrying away, it occurred to Mario that he couldn't remember ever getting a reply text from this older man. Maybe the gauntlet had been enough for Ted. But, jumping over the surprise reunion and his feelings of longing, the realization of what this situation was, truly fortuitous, finally landed in Mario's brain. Ted almost certainly had access to this building, which, for Mario, could entail a tour of the building. And, as a bonus, it might mean that he'd get to have Ted in a different way, taste more of this man who tickled his fancy, with that delicious hearty build of his, the ideal daddy, sweet with the silliness. Not to mention, Ted had a cock he really enjoyed sucking. Out there on the plaza, business people, citizens crisscrossing past each other with plans in mind, Mario's anger wasn't suddenly gone, snuffed by attraction. No, it wouldn't vanish without some sort of resolution for his mother, and what cruel things men had let her body get away with. Though, when Mario saw Ted get harassed by a religious canvasser, a protectiveness did flood his brain. Now, was it true that in this act of heroism and reuniting, Mario might be seeking both Ted's intel about access to this office building and another kiss from the older man? In that hungry way? The kind that's like being devoured? Undeniably so, and the young man knew it was worth a shot at both. There, fingering a man's tie, Mario had surprised himself, not usually the aggressively aggressive type when it came to romance, especially in sober moments. But after directly mentioning Ted's ghosting and complimenting the older man, Mario had to admit that he had revealed his vulnerability, his yearning, because he cared about this, about Ted, despite everything that he was going through. His friendships could suffer and the good times could pass him by, but this sudden opportunity with this man was too enticing, because, enjoying the silk tie slipping through his fingers, relishing the coolness of the fabric, Mario saw a concrete distraction with extracurricular benefits. You like it? My tie. Ted's nervousness really did something for Mario. The nerves were in Ted's quivering voice and also in his posture. He was practically leaning back from Mario, sharply angled, a way of standing that no one could possibly find comfortable. Mario nearly yanked on the tie to pull him in for a kiss, but that could wait. There were other things to consider. Do you want the tie? Ted asked. I have a lot at home. Just like it? Mario asked. Mario pushed his pureness of desire into his gaze, firing a burning glance at the older man. That gray stubble across Ted's chin would do wonders, Mario thought, exfoliating his young skin should they come together, rubbing rough on his own chin, and maybe even the base of his ass. Was Ted into butt stuff? The younger man didn't know, but one day he might catch a clue. By way of an exploratory tongue or prodding finger, Ted stopped looking around, whether no longer nervous about being seen with Mario or now unafraid of another run-in with the canvasser. Mario didn't know, but a succinct, stammerless, came out of the older man, and Mario realized he was getting himself closer to the inside of that building, with name placards outside HealthShare United's offices, where very important people decreed exactly where they were going to be. Dude! Mario and Ted turned around to see the other two skateboarders, one pivoting his board in a lazy circle, the other sitting on the bench next to the stalwart pigeon. My bad. I'm gonna bounce. Gotta take a shit, Mario called over before turning around to Ted. I'm lying. With a slight nod, Ted tried to hide his visible disgust, which quickly dissolved when Mario asked, But what are you up to? I was going to go... Ted trailed off, seemingly not due to nerves but forgetfulness. His narrowing eyes verified this. I don't remember. You seem to have that effect on me. Ted's openness caught Mario off guard. In their short time together, the older man was visibly scared but verbally cautious. But now he was being honest with Mario, and some of the young man's feelings of sexual heat sugared to those of a crush, all Vaseline filters and glittering roses. Mario had expected more time with Ted's dick instead of his mind or his heart, and yet this unexpected warmth, gentle, clearly blooming in both of them, felt right. Do you have an office up there? Mario threw his head back toward the building. 'Cause I can help you remember, he shrugged. Or forget. Skepticism and redness both rushed to Ted's face. Do you plan to say stuff like this, Mario? Do you have these lines on file? Nah. You just kinda, have that effect on me. The line landed, and charmed, Ted looked away, this time nodding to himself as if to say, Oh boy, what have I found myself in? Ted's mouth turned left, then right, while he bobbed his head, clearly crunching some numbers. Well, Shayla, my secretary, she's still up there. Have a good one, Ted. A stiff red updo, heading for the escalators, passed behind the older man, who turned to reply, Good night, Shayla. Mario leaned in while Ted smirked, redoing his math. So, Ted, have you ever gotten head at your desk? Mario asked. No, Ted's smile got in the way of his talking. Can't say that I have. That was Baby Don't Shoot, a gay love story inspired by Luigi Mangione, written by Sally Strait and performed by Gray Trainor. Did you enjoy yourself? Good. Then join us next Wednesday for the next installment. Consider supporting the author at buymeacoffee.com/Sally Strait. That's buymeacoffee.com/Sally Strait. SALLYSTRAIT. Baby Don't Shoot is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental. No generative artificial intelligence was used in the writing of this work.